He was 28 years old, quiet, thoughtful, and most at peace when the noise of the world faded behind the rustling of trees and the distant crackle of a campfire. Daniel Whitaker wasn't running from life. Not exactly. But on October 14th, 2022, he left something behind. That Friday morning, Daniel drove his silver Subaru Outback east, away from the city and into the shadow of Mount Rainier. His destination was simple: solitude. He signed in at a ranger station just before 10 a.m., exchanged a few polite words with the park attendant, then slipped into the wilderness carrying a mid-sized pack, a Nikon camera, and a folded map with handwritten notations. The weather was unusually calm for October mid-60s, light cloud cover, and no storms on the forecast. Conditions were ideal for a weekend hike. When asked by the ranger where he planned to go, Daniel pointed toward the Ohanapekash area. No permits required. Just a man walking into the woods alone. That was the last time anyone saw him. When Daniel didn't show up for work the following Monday, his sister, Emily, knew something was wrong. He was punctual to a fault, the kind of person who sent running 5 minutes late texts if he hit a red light. She called his phone straight to voicemail. She waited an hour, then 3, then filed a missing persons report. Authorities found his car parked at a trailhead near the Laughing Water Creek Trail, undisturbed. Inside were granola bar wrappers, a water bottle, and a note scrawled on a napkin: "Be back Sunday night. Should be quiet." But there was no signal from Daniel's phone. No pings, no emergency beacon, no distress calls, nothing. A search began the next morning with dogs, drones, and thermal imaging. For 3 days, the team combed the trails and riverbanks. They found footprints near the trail's edge, but lost them in the mud. Helicopters swept the area. Campers were questioned. No one had seen a man matching Daniel's description. As the days stretched into weeks, the theory shifted from lost hiker to something stranger, something colder. Because in a forest, that vast silence doesn't mean safety. Sometimes, it's the loudest warning of all. Daniel Whitaker didn't chase danger. He chased clarity. An avid hiker with over a decade of backcountry experience, he respected the wild in a way most weekend adventurers didn't. He didn't show off, didn't take risks for the sake of photos or bragging rights. He carried the gear he needed and left the rest behind. For Daniel, nature wasn't about conquest. It was about stillness, about shedding the noise and weight of modern life. Those who knew him said he'd always been a little remove-friendly but distant, like his heart was tuned to a frequency only the trees could hear. After his 5-year relationship ended in the spring of 2022, friends noticed a shift. Daniel stopped posting on social media. He sold his apartment in Tacoma, moved into a studio closer to the foothills. He took photos, mostly forests, mist, the occasional wild animal, but never shared them. "I'm just trying to get my head right," he'd said once. No one pressed further. The trail he chose near Ohanapekash was one even seasoned hikers avoided. Overgrown, rugged, with switchbacks that vanished into brush and elevation gains that punished the knees. But it was beautiful, thick with moss-covered trees and ancient volcanic boulders. Daniel had hiked it before, or at least part of it. He'd mentioned it once at a family dinner. Said he wanted to complete the full loop solo before winter hit. He packed a light tent, a compact stove, freeze-dried meals, and a solar power bank. He brought his Nikon, a journal, and a knife. No satellite phone, but he'd never needed one before. He left no itinerary beyond the word quiet. It wasn't a farewell, it was just Daniel being Daniel. The thing is, people don't just vanish. Not without a trace, not without something being left behind. Even the animals leave trails. Even the rivers give back what they take. But for 18 months, Daniel Whitaker left nothing. No gear scattered, no campsites used, no body. Just a man who stepped off a trail and into the unknown. And maybe that's what he wanted. Or maybe something was waiting for him there. Because when a man like Daniel disappears without a sound, it's not the wind you should fear. It's what moves quieter than the wind. At first, it was just a missed text, then a missed day of work. But by Sunday evening, the growing unease in Daniel Whitaker's family had hardened into something heavier. He told his sister Emily he'd be back that night. He always checked in even if it was just a simple "back safe." But this time, there was nothing. Monday came and went. Calls went unanswered. His phone went straight to voicemail. By Tuesday morning, a missing persons report had been filed, and a ranger at Mount Rainier National Park took the call with a pause long enough to suggest he'd heard this kind of worry before. Still, protocol kicked in. Within 48 hours, a formal search was launched. It started with a focused sweep near the Laughing Water Creek trailhead, where Daniel's car had been found. Rangers and local volunteers walked grids. Search and rescue dogs were brought in. Helicopters hovered low, using thermal imaging to scan tree cover and ravines. For 3 days straight, the search widened in careful concentric circles. They looked for anything disturbed: brush, gear, clothing, footprints, but found nothing. Not a broken twig, not a scrap of nylon, not even a dropped granola wrapper. Daniel had vanished into the woods as though the ground had swallowed him whole. By Friday, the tone shifted. What was supposed to be a rescue became a recovery mission in everything but name. The weather held, but the mood darkened. Search teams moved more methodically now, with a kind of dread. They knew the statistics. After 72 hours, chances of survival in the wild dropped significantly, especially in October. Even with experience, even with gear. Still, Emily refused to accept it. She stood at the trailhead each morning with coffee in one hand and binoculars in the other, watching the trees like they were holding a secret they just wouldn't share. And maybe they were. Because as the sun set on the 5th day, the mountains stood quiet, indifferent as ever, and Daniel Whitaker was still nowhere to be found. The car was locked, undisturbed, parked neatly along the trailhead pull-off like it had been left only moments ago. Inside, searchers found Daniel's wallet, tucked in the center console, and his keys under the passenger seat. A trail map sat unfolded across the dashboard. 3 red X's marked off sections far from the main paths, clustered near a ridge known for sudden weather shifts and difficult terrain. It was strange. Daniel had told no one about these locations. Stranger still was the journal found in the glove compartment Tholf written, with the last entry ending mid-sentence. Sometimes I feel like the silence isn't empty. It's nothing more. Just that unfinished thought. But it was the photograph that stopped the ranger in his tracks. A black and white print of Daniel, smiling faintly in front of a snow-dusted forest, was tucked between the pages of the journal. On the back, written in a scrawl none of his family recognized, were 5 words: "I need to go. D." Whatever this was, it wasn't just a hike anymore. That same afternoon, 2 hikers reported seeing someone matching Daniel's description off-trail the day he disappeared. They hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a lone man moving through the trees beyond the switchbacks, backpack slung low, stepping deliberately into denser growth. They assumed he knew where he was going. But now, those few seconds of observation felt loaded. Had Daniel chosen to leave the trail? Or had something drawn him off it? The problem wasn't just where he'd gone, it was how completely he'd gone there. Experienced trackers walked the area where he was supposedly seen. No prints, no bent grass, no signs of life or death. Just a corridor of trees and a trail that ended in moss and mist. Whatever happened beyond that point, Daniel had crossed an invisible threshold. The kind people don't come back from. The kind that doesn't show up on any map. For 30 days, they searched. Through thick forest, across riverbeds, along hidden switchbacks and up treacherous slopes, where the air thinned and the moss turned slick. The dogs grew tired. The volunteers, blistered and sore, began rotating shifts. Helicopters burned fuel in wide, sweeping arcs, their rotors chopping through clouds that hung low over the peaks, like secrets the mountain refused to give up. But Daniel Whitaker did not reappear. Not in the brush, not by the creeks, not even as a name whispered by hikers who thought they heard footsteps behind them, only to turn and find nothing. Then, on day 14, a ranger stumbled across a torn backpack strap snagged on a branch deep inside a ravine nearly 2 miles from the trailhead. Beneath it, partially buried in mud, lay the scorched remnants of a compact stove, the same brand Daniel was known to use. But no pack, no food wrappers, no journal, no blood, no drag marks. Just a piece of nylon frayed at the end, as if it had been sliced, or snapped, or left there. For the family, it was something. For the searchers, it wasn't enough. The park's official report marked the site as inconclusive. No signs of wild animal activity, no indication of a fall, no human remains. The area had been checked before twice and, both times, nothing had been found. Some said it must have been missed. Others weren't so sure. The forest was playing tricks. Or something else was. By day 30, with no new leads and no clear direction, the search was scaled back. Helicopters were grounded. Dog teams were called. The forest was too vast, too uncooperative. The likelihood of finding anything more, let alone someone alive, was close to zero. Daniel's case was reclassified as missing, presumed dead, but that word presumed was a thread his family refused to cut. The first theories trickled in quietly, in Reddit threads and hiker forums filled with weekend adventurers and true crime obsessives. Then came the YouTube videos, the TikToks, the podcasts with names like Missing in the Pines and Whispers from Rainier. They all wanted to know the same thing. What really happened to Daniel Whitaker? Some said he'd planned it, that he'd chosen to disappear, to walk off the grid and never look back. That the breakup, the journal, the photo I need to go wasn't a goodbye to the world, but a doorway to another life. Others claimed something darker. Suicide, cloaked in solitude. A descent into wilderness-induced psychosis. There were even rumors of Murdera Drifter, a rogue ranger, a wrong place at the wrong time. But the theory that kept coming back, whispered like a campfire ghost story, was the one locals had long been uneasy about, the Rainier Triangle. A stretch of forest from Paradise to Carbon River, where hikers disappear with eerie frequency. No bodies, no gear, no clues. Some blamed extreme weather. Others pointed to unstable terrain and outdated maps. But then there were the ones who spoke of rituals, lights in the trees, voices in the fog. A forest that didn't just hide things, it kept them. Daniel's family tried to ignore the noise, but even they couldn't help wondering. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. He had everything he needed. And he had people who loved him. Emily, his sister, gave interviews saying he'd been off, but not suicidal. His mother admitted he'd been searching for something. Peace, purpose, something bigger than himself. Something he thought he might find in the silence between the trees. But if he found it, he never came back to tell them what it was. After the search ended, the silence didn't. It stretched. It lingered. It settled into the bones of everyone who'd known Daniel Whitaker, curling up in the corners of their lives like fog that refused to lift. His mother stopped checking the porch for letters. Emily deleted his number from her phone, but kept the last voicemail saved. Every now and then, someone would post in a forum, "Any updates on the Rainier hiker?" But the thread would go quiet just as quickly as it appeared. Mount Rainier, meanwhile, moved on. The snow came, the snow melted, seasons turned, trails closed and reopened. Tourists returned with cameras and daypacks, unaware they were walking through the same woods that had swallowed a man whole. Daniel's case was folded neatly into a drawer, marked cold, tucked between other names that had faded from public memory. For a time, it seemed like that was how it would stay. Then, in March 2024, another hiker vanished. A solo backpacker named Lucas Reardon, 32, never returned from a trip near Mowich Lake. Same profile, same general area. Same result. No signs, no clues, just silence. Rangers pulled Daniel's file back out, wondering if the two cases might be connected. They combed through old notes, mapped overlapping GPS grids, reread witness statements. It was déjà vu, and just as empty. Until May. It was early in the season, the trails still muddy and snow lingering at higher elevations. Two experienced rock climbers friends from Seattle on a weekend climb were scaling a bluff near Tolmy Peak, a jagged, quiet corner of the park where few people ventured off-route. They weren't looking for anything unusual, just new routes and clean holds. But as they rounded a crag, a sharp, sour smell caught their attention faint at first, then unmistakable. They followed it to a patch of pines where the wind barely moved. And there, suspended high in the trees, swaying just slightly in the mountain breeze, was a shape, too large to be an animal, too high to be natural, too human to be ignored. At first, they thought it might be a fallen pack, maybe gear caught in a storm or left behind by another climber. But as they moved closer, ropes drawn, boots crunching against loose stone, they saw the truth. It wasn't gear, it wasn't an animal, it was a body, suspended nearly 30 feet off the ground, caught in a high fork between two trees like a forgotten marionette. The scent hit harder, now sweet, decaying, sour at the edges. One of the climbers turned away and vomited. The other stared, stunned, into the tangle of limbs, rope, and dark fabric. The body was thin, shriveled, but intact. Cold weather and high altitude had preserved it like a twisted relic. Clothes faded but still whole. Skin darkened but leathery, stretched tight across a jaw, frozen in something like a scream. No visible trauma, no signs of attack, just hanging. The climbers called it in. Rangers arrived that evening and cordoned off the area. The recovery was delicata ropes, pulleys, a helicopter lift. Rangers documented every inch, every angle. And though they said nothing at the time, they knew. The moment they saw the hiking boots, the jacket with the missing strap, the brand of stove Daniel had used, the old Nikon still slung around the mummified shoulder. It was Daniel Whitaker. 18 months after he vanished without a trace, he had reappeared in a place no one had searched, in a position no one could explain. Hung in the trees, as if the forest itself had lifted him up and forgotten to put him back down. And that was only the beginning. It didn't take long to confirm what the Rangers already suspected. The remains found high in the pines near Tolmie Peak belonged to Daniel Whitaker. Dental records were the first match. DNA sealed it. His mother wept when they told her. Emily stared at the officer, blinking in silence, as if she couldn't decide whether to collapse or scream. Closure had finally come, but it wasn't the kind anyone wanted. The condition of the body raised more questions than it answered. He was still wearing the same hiking jacket and pants he'd left home in, but his boots were gone. His feet were bare, mottled from exposure, toes curled like they'd clenched in the final moment. Stranger still, his hands were bound not tightly, but loosely, as if whoever tied them didn't want him to escape, but also didn't care if he did. The paracord wasn't knotted in any way that would hold against a real struggle. It was symbolic, a gesture, or a message. Beneath the tree, placed carefully on a patch of flattened moss, were two items: Daniel's driver's license and his cell phone. The phone was dead, its screen cracked, battery drained long ago. But its position directly below the body, centered and undisturbed, felt deliberate. It was as if someone had arranged it, a silent signature. This is who he was. There were no drag marks, no scuffs on the bark, no sign that he had climbed or fallen, just the body, the bindings, and the items laid at the base with clinical precision. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as asphyxiation consistent with hanging, but the manner? Undetermined. Suicide, homicide, staged accident, none fit neatly. And nothing in Daniel's background explained why he would end up here, high above the ground, posed like an offering the forest had grown tired of keeping. Whatever happened to Daniel didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen alone. The tree was an old-growth Douglas fir, nearly 130 feet tall, with bark worn smooth by wind and age. Its lower branches were sparse and high off the ground, no footholds, no low limbs to start a climb. Investigators examined it closely, circling, measuring, trying to understand how a man with no climbing gear ended up suspended 30 feet above the forest floor. There were no ropes or carabiners nearby, no ladder marks, no disturbed earth where someone might have propped something up. The body hadn't been lifted from above the canopy, was too thick for any aerial access, even with modern equipment. And wind? No chance. No storm, no natural event could have carried a full-grown man that high and wedged him perfectly between the limbs. The angles didn't match, the body wasn't tangled. It was placed. The location was remote-so remote that even experienced rangers admitted they'd never been to that bluff. The path up to it was steep, unmarked, and nearly vertical in sections. Not a place you'd wander into by accident, which begged the question, why here? Why this tree? The area surrounding the bluff showed no signs of a camp, no spent fire pits, no garbage, no gear. It was as though Daniel had been carried there not necessarily physically, but drawn. As if something or someone had brought him to that exact point for a reason that defied logic or explanation. A place invisible to aerial search, a place few would ever think to look. One ranger, who asked not to be named, said quietly, "It's like the forest kept him until it decided not to." Another simply called it what it felt like, impossible. There was no way Daniel got up there on his own, but there was no evidence that anyone else had helped. No footprints, no foreign DNA, no answers. Just a tree, a body, and a mystery suspended in the air, still hanging there long after the search had ended. Daniel Whitaker had been dead for over a year by the time they found him, but the altitude and cold had preserved him in ways that unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. His body was mummified, skin leathery, pulled tight across bone, eyes long gone but sockets still intact. His limbs, though stiff, had not collapsed into disarray. He looked posed, his arms hanging unnaturally symmetrical at his sides, as if placed that way with intention, as if the end hadn't just happened but had been arranged. The official cause of death, after the coroner's report, was asphyxiation consistent with hanging. No signs of a struggle, no blunt force trauma, no broken bones beyond those in his neck. It was a textbook hanging, except for everything that wasn't. For starters, his boots. They weren't on his feet, nor scattered like they'd been kicked off in panic. Instead, they were found at the base of the tree, set side by side, perfectly aligned, facing due north. They weren't muddy or torn, they hadn't been thrown, they had been placed, measured, intentional. It was the kind of detail that doesn't show up in an autopsy, but it's what detectives remember most. Then there was the paracord loosely bound around his wrists, offering more symbolism than restraint, and his ID and phone placed carefully beneath him, as if someone wanted him to be found eventually. Not right away, but someday. There were no animal bites, no insect damage, no evidence that scavengers had disturbed the scene. It was like nature itself had chosen to leave him untouched, protected, preserved. But preserved for what? That was the question that stuck with the lead investigator, who later said, "I've seen a lot of things in these woods, but this felt wrong, like it was waiting for us." And maybe it was. Because the strangest detail of all wasn't the body. It was what they found above it, wedged between the branches like a secret never meant to be kept. It was a junior ranger who spotted it, just a corner of plastic jutting out from the crook of a branch, glinting faintly in the late afternoon light. She climbed halfway up the tree, careful not to disturb the hanging body, and retrieved the object, a Ziploc bag, weathered and fogged from time, but sealed. Inside were 6 torn, yellowed pages, water-stained and scrawled with Daniel's handwriting shaky, fragmented, but unmistakably his. The first page was dated October 15th, 2022, just one day after he'd gone missing. "I heard them again last night," it began. No context, no elaboration, just the sentence, as if he'd picked up in the middle of something already in motion. Another page read, "The trees are watching. Not all of them. Just the tall ones. The ones that never move, even when the wind does." There were drawings, 2 crude sketches of twisted limbs and wide, dark eyes. One looked like a man, but distorted. Arms too long, mouth a jagged black void. Underneath, Daniel had written, "Not human. Never was." Another entry, "It's not a place you go toits, a place that finds you. I thought I came here, but I was brought." The writing became harder to read after that. More slanted, letters uneven, ink smeared like it had been written in panic. "They don't like light," one page said. "They wait until the mind opens." The final page was nearly blank. Only one sentence was legible. "If you find this, it's already too late." The journal was handed over to the FBI. They ran forensic tests, fingerprints, DNA, ink composition. All confirmed to be Daniel's. There were no other prints, no foreign substances. Just Daniel's voice, growing more fractured with each line, spiraling into something beyond fear, beyond reason. Emily read the pages once, then refused to see them again. "That wasn't my brother at the end," she said. "Something changed in him, or something got to him." And maybe that was the truth, that Daniel had gone looking for silence, but something else found him first, something that knew how to wait, something that knew where he'd be. In the days that followed the recovery of Daniel Whitaker's body, investigators and experts gathered in a closed room to review everything they had: photos, reports, journal pages, autopsy findings. What they had was a complete picture, and yet not a single piece of it made sense. The conclusion read like a contradiction. No clear signs of foul play, no forensic evidence of an attacker, no defensive wounds, no foreign DNA. And still, no one could explain how a man with no climbing gear ended up hanging 30 feet in the air, with his boots off and his hands tied like a prop in some kind of ritual play. The hanging was consistent with suicide, that much they could say. But everything else, his belongings neatly arranged, the loose bindings on his wrists, the journal pages stashed high above his head, spoke to the presence of someone else, or something else. The evidence didn't add up to a murder, and it didn't fall neatly into mental illness, either. Daniel's family insisted he wasn't suicidal. And while his journal entries grew darker, they weren't hopeless, they were scared, terrified. As if he believed he was being hunted, watched by something not human. Something that knew the terrain better than he did. Why had he taken off his boots? Why place them so precisely, facing north? Why tie his wrists loosely, as if inviting someone or something to finish the job? Theories flooded back in. Cult activity, a backwoods recluse, a cryptid encounter. Some even revisited the Rainier triangle theory, noting the pattern of disappearances in the same geographic cluster. But none of the theories could explain the surgical precision of the scene, or the absence of mistakes. No footprints, no drag marks, no missteps. Just Daniel. Alone. Bound. Suspended like an unanswered question the forest had been holding onto for too long. In the end, the case had no suspects. No motive. No timeline that made sense. It was the kind of mystery that leaves scars not just on the family, but on everyone who tried to solve it. Because the only thing worse than finding a body is finding one that tells you nothing. The official ruling came 2 weeks later. Manner of death undetermined. It was the only box they could check. Suicide wasn't supported. Homicide couldn't be proven. And an accident? No one could explain how. So they left it open, a blank line in a case file now sealed but never truly closed. Daniel Whitaker's death joined a growing list of disappearances in and around Mount Rainier, stories that start the same way and end with no real ending at all. But for the people who live near the park, the story didn't end with the paperwork. In town, whispers started up again. Old rumors reawakened. Hikers talked about strange noises near Tolmy Peak clicks and hums in the trees, like whispers in a language no one understood. Others spoke of lights between the trees, flickering and low, always just out of reach. And some, especially the old-timers, said it outright. That part of the mountain doesn't like being disturbed. The forest was shifting, restless. In the months after Daniel's body was discovered, 2 more solo hikers vanished in the same quadrant. Both experienced. Both healthy. Both, like Daniel, traveling alone. Search teams found nothing, not even a broken twig. And yet the trailhead stays open. People keep hiking, drawn to the beauty, the silence, the idea that the wild still holds something pure. But the locals avoid it. They don't go near Tolmy Peak anymore. Not after what they found hanging in that tree. Emily doesn't visit the park. She says she can't. It took my brother, she told reporters, and I don't think it gave him back. Some mysteries you solve, others you carry. Daniel's story is the second kind. Not a riddle to answer, but a wound you walk around. A reminder that nature doesn't always forgive. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes, when you walk too far into the trees, it notices. There are places in the world that resist explanation, quiet corners where logic goes soft at the edges and the ordinary rules don't seem to apply. Mount Rainier is one of them. Towering, still, cloaked in fog and myth, it doesn't roar or rage. It waits. For what? No one can say. But after Daniel Whitaker vanished, after they found him hanging like a question in the trees, even the most skeptical among the search teams admitted something about that part of the forest felt wrong. Not evil. Just aware. Daniel didn't leave a confession. No grand message. No trail of breadcrumbs leading to some revelation about his state of mind. What he left behind was more unsettling. Symbols, fragments, fear. A man who walked into the woods searching for clarity and left only riddles behind. The journal pages don't explain his death. They deepen the mystery. His gear didn't scatter. It was arranged. His final act didn't scream desperation at whispered design. But whose? There's a certain kind of silence in deep wilderness. It's not peaceful. It presses. It watches. Maybe Daniel felt it before anyone else did. Maybe he tried to write it down and found that words couldn't carry the weight of what he saw, or heard, or sensed. Or maybe it was nothing at all. Maybe it was suicide, touched by the surreal distortions of time and weather. Maybe the forest had nothing to do with it. But that's the thing about places like Rainier. Certainty is the first thing that disappears. The mountain doesn't rush. It has time. It erases slowly, gently, until only the outline remains, the echo of footsteps that go in but never come back out. And in that space between knowing and never knowing, we are left to wonder, was Daniel taken by something, or did he find something he couldn't come back from? The files are closed, the search is over, but the questions remain, settled deep in the roots and riverbeds of the mountain, waiting for the next name, because the forest doesn't need to move to reach you. It just needs you to come a little closer. Sometimes, the mountain doesn't take you. It waits for you to come back. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.